If I Was, Midge Ure from his new album Orchestrated. This is the latest masterpiece from Midge, who's in North America touring with Paul Young and on Revenge of the 80s radio with me now. Welcome back to the show, Midge.
Hey Chris, how you doing? Lovely to talk to you again.
It's great to have you on again, as always. Now, we've heard you with full studio equipment, have seen you play with all the electronics, and we've seen you play unplugged. This time, you recorded with a full orchestra. What inspired you to do this and make an album out of it, Midge?
I think it's one of these things that kind of happens to you the longer you continue performing. You seem to be invited to perform in orchestral situations. And I think there's been a big crossover between the orchestral world and the classical world and the opera world and the rock and pop side of things for quite a few years now. So every time I've performed with an orchestra and played one of my songs or one of the old Ultravox songs or whatever, they just seem to fit. That all those original tunes, all the melodies I still write are very cinematic and very atmospheric, and they just come to life with an orchestra. So I just thought, you know what, let's have a try and just see what we can do with an orchestra that we couldn't just do with synthesizers.
I'm pretty sure many of your fans, and you just said you've done that, were listening to tracks like Him or Vienna back in the 80s and thinking, this would really sound great in a concert with a full orchestra. Actually, many of the Ultravox songs fit that way.
I think that's probably true. It's just one of these scenarios that it doesn't really come around the opportunity to do that, because it's quite an expensive process, but it's also an incredibly long process. In true Midge Ure style, I didn't just pop into a studio, re-record the old tracks and then stick some strings on it. I spent 18 months doing the orchestrations before we even got near an orchestra. So I wanted to do something where I could take those songs and not ruin the original feelings from the original material, because a lot of people, when they re-record stuff, it kind of kills the original recordings. So I was very, very aware that I didn't want to do that. So I spent 18 months doing this, and then a further 6 months recording and mixing this. So it's a 2-year process to get this done. So, but yeah, it's the sort of thing that if you could imagine those songs taken onto a slightly different plane, that's exactly what this album sounds like.
24 months. That's a lot. I guess I should ask this question. What did it take to get Orchestrated out of the idea stage?
It took the first stage that I really had and that I had a problem with was that I do not understand orchestras. I can do many things, but I do not read or write notation. So, I create from the heart. I create from the hip, as it were. So finding the right person to do the orchestrations with was absolutely imperative to me, because I wanted someone who understood my side of the fence, so guitars and synthesizers and modern recording techniques, but could also understand the other side of the fence, which was the orchestrations, the orchestra, how an orchestra works. And I found that guy weirdly at Howard Jones's house. Having lunch, and just met this guy who knew everything I had ever done, and his job is to write film music. So it was a marriage made in heaven, really.
And how about putting it together? I mean, finding the right people for the orchestra, mixing it, and everything else.
Well, we're very lucky. We're very fortunate in Europe that, in former Eastern Europe, and Yugoslavia, or former Yugoslavia, and Bulgaria, and all of that, there are amazing classical musicians. And we ended up going to Sofia in Bulgaria and used an orchestra there, where they had an entire studio set up perfectly ready and primed to do something like this. And I have to tell you that the most bizarre thing for me is looking at this room full of, to me, strangers. They knew each other, maybe, kind of nodding acquaintances or whatever, because orchestras slip and slide. It's not a fixed unit, so people come and go. And then seeing these people all sit down in their chairs, put on their one-sided headphones, pick up their instruments, start tuning up, and someone walks around and puts a sheet of paper in front of each of them with dots on it. And these, 50, 60 people, all of a sudden, the moment the conductor clicks his baton, they all start playing in unison. They all start playing this amazing thing with all the passion and all the feel. And I just do not understand it. I find it really alien. But to sit there and hear these people play something that I had written was just outstanding. So we're very lucky. We have a huge choice of people that we can use.
I loved playing the brass instruments when I was younger. I've done jazz bands, orchestras, things like that, marching bands even. And yes, you're right. There is a passion to doing something like that because a lot of these instruments aren't considered cool and hip, but really, if you go to a Philharmonic, these orchestras sell out.
Absolutely, these are consummate musicians. These people are just unbelievable. And of course, these days, 30, 40 years ago, it was difficult to get an orchestra to swing, to flow, to groove, kind of. But these days, all the players have grown up listening to rock and pop and blues and jazz and whatever. So they're incredibly flexible players. So the idea of doing all the little kicks and the emotions and the twists that we have in my music, they just got it. It was just absolutely brilliant.
Really, it all comes from classical, which was the, let's say, rock music of the time.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. You think about it. You think, Mozart was writing the pop tunes of the day, as was Tchaikovsky. Beautiful melodies, and that was the populist music. It's quite incredible that it's kind of come full circle now. And of course, all these orchestras are used to, doing film soundtrack music and doing music for, video games and all of that stuff. So they have to be, the consummate musicians. So one day they're playing on a rock track, the next day they're playing on a video game, and the next day they're doing a classical, concert somewhere in Europe. So they have to be very, very good, top of the game.
Midge Ure is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. We're talking about his new album, Orchestrated. Let's go to some of the tracks. I'll go right with Vienna first, because I always thought that was sort of a nod to classical anyway.
Well, it kind of was. You think, although people think of Vienna as a very synthesized record, when you actually deconstruct it musically, yes, it has electronic drums and it has a synthesized bass and it has a synthesizer playing a melody line, but it also has piano. It also has, a viola solo in the middle of it. So, a lot of the melody there came from the keyboard player in Ultravox, Billy Currie, who was classically trained. So there's an essence of it. And Vienna always had that mystique, or that cinematic, ethereal quality to it. And of course, when it came to doing Vienna, I thought, yeah, Vienna will be the obvious standout track. Weirdly, I don't think it is. I think some of the other songs that we've worked on have taken on an entire new life and become infinitely more interesting than I thought they ever would be. So yeah, it's funny how you set your benchmark at something like Vienna and think we'll never get anything better. When we do an orchestrated version, that will be the pinnacle. And then we've gone beyond that. So I'm extremely happy.
We have just heard a perfect example of what you were saying with If I Was.
Right. Now, If I Was, again, it's a very simplistic pop song. And I thought, well, how do we do this? And we kept thinking, Eleanor Rigby or Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill or Cloud Busting. The stomping cello, these stomping cellos chugging its way through this like a large string quartet. So thinking about the treatment you're going to give the songs took up a huge amount of time. Talking through it before committing to sitting, doing all the arrangements, because the arrangements do take a long time to get how you want them.
You wrote the song Ordinary Man with Ty Irwin, especially for this album, Midge. Did you both have in mind writing this with the orchestra, or was it something you thought of to write first and then say, hey, let's put this on the Orchestrated album?
It was something that came about halfway through the process. The key to doing something like this is getting the first arrangement right. And the first arrangement we did was The Voice, Ultravox is The Voice. And it really resonated. We just nailed it. It just seemed to work perfectly. And once we had the kind of once we knew the guidance, we knew where we were heading, which direction we were taking this, and we started feeling comfortable about the whole process, and it became something that we didn't think about more than actually do. We were in the flow. Ty said, well, wouldn't it be interesting writing something brand new and seeing how that turns out at the end? So we started writing something specifically with an orchestra in mind, and ended up with Ordinary Man. Now, I think the interesting thing about this album is that some tracks on there are nearly 40 years old, the songs, but Ordinary Man is brand new. And I wanted, if someone came from outer space, landed somewhere on our planet, and then asked what a Midge Ure was, that they could play that album and they would not be able to tell, songwriting wise at least, the difference between a nearly 40-year-old song and a brand new song, that they could sit side by side quite comfortably. And I think we achieved that.
Well, then again, if they listen to the album, they might kidnap you and take you to their planet to make you perform concerts for them all the time. We'd miss you here.
Thank you.
How did you choose the songs to record for Orchestrated? Because you do have a huge library.
Well, Ty was a major part of that because, as I said earlier, Ty was brought up. He's younger than I was. He was brought up being introduced to synthesizers by watching Ultravox and Howard Jones and whatever on Top of the Pops, our big pop program back in the 70s. So he knew absolutely he knew all the stuff I'd forgotten that I'd done. So he was throwing B-sides and obscure tracks that I had no recollection of whatsoever. So between the two of us, we honed down to the songs that we ended up with. We've got 12 songs or 14 songs, whatever it is, and a lot of songs. I mean, we could have carried on doing this for the next 10 years and not run dry, because a lot of the songs, as I said, they have those melodies, they have those counter melodies, they have the drama, they have the kind of cinematic essence about them. So we could have carried on. But between the two of us, we managed to agree on all the stuff that we wanted to do. So that's us. We had to draw a line under it and go, right, okay, that's got to come out now.
Midge Ure is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. We're talking about the new album Orchestrated, yes, with a full orchestra. The album was just released in North America. It's on CD downloads and clear vinyl, I see.
Yes, well, when you do something like this, I mean, there's a lot of love and time and effort put into making this. You do not want to just throw it out there. You want to have the best quality reproduction that you can get. So we put it out on vinyl. So we've got a double vinyl version of it. So each side of the vinyl has 3 tracks on it. So it's high quality. It's great. There's something about the process of choosing a record from your shelf and deciding what you want to hear rather than hitting a random button on your phone and putting it on a turntable and putting the needle down and then hearing this glorious noise. So yeah, we've just released it here, which is fantastic. And the vinyl's just come out in Europe as well at the same time.
And as we're speaking, you're in the midst of a tour of North America with Paul Young.
I am, my old pal. Paul, I mean, we've known each other for such a long time and we've been on the same bill at many a festival, but we've never actually toured together. So I approached Paul last year, knowing that he had just finished the Retro Futura tour last year. So the first time he had performed in North America for a long time. And I just said, well, next time, you go out, why don't we just do it together? It seems to make perfect sense. We can, we're compatible artists, we're friends, we get on well. So we did that. We put an American an American band together, all ex-Berkeley students, all wonderful, wonderful musicians, and we're out and about doing our thing, which is proving to be really good fun.
I guess you're both experiencing the love of the common people here in the U.S.
This means nothing to me, Chris. Oh, we're going to get into some really dodgy ones here. Yeah.
Last time we talked, you said you like to drive when you're on tour. You still doing that around this time, or maybe dates are a little too close together? But I remember you saying you really enjoy driving from place to place because you get to see the country.
I do. The first time I toured in America, I was here as a temporary member of Thin Lizzy, and we flew everywhere. And when I got home and people said, well, what's America like? And I said, well, it's like hotels and airports, because that's all I ever saw. I didn't see anything else. So when Ultravox came out in 79 or 80, I think it was the first time I came, we were in a state vehicle, a kind of shooting brake thing, and we drove everywhere. So we saw more of America than most Americans see. And that's just the best way to do it ever. So yeah, I was still driving around, still enjoying it. I still grab the wheel and take off and live out my boyhood cowboy fantasies.
It's a good idea for a documentary, maybe a Midge Ure road trip across the country. That might be fun.
Yeah, there you go. Yes, a little travelogue.
How about Live Aid? I know it's still active and you're still the trustee. Any plans with the charity for the near future?
No, we never plan. Right now, there are no plans for any further activity. But as you well know, when we wrote the Do They Know It's Christmas song, when Bob and I wrote it, we donated the songwriting royalties. We gave the song to the Band Aid Trust. So forever, forever, the copyright is there, which will be long after Bob and I are gone. Every time that song is played or re-recorded or used in a movie or whatever, it generates income for the cause. So, I think the reality is that maybe every anniversary, every decade, a new generation of musicians should get that song and do a modern interpretation of it, because it all adds to the same, it's all fuel to the same fire. It's all money going straight into the same source. Recently we had, is it Daddy's Home 2 movie, and they used the song, and that generated a huge amount of money for the cause. A few years back, Glee, the cast of Glee, did a version of the song on a Christmas special, and it went on a CD, and that generated something like $500,000, which is just, unbelievable. So yes, it carries on, and I'd like to see that continue. But as for further live aid type events, I really have no idea. It'd be nice to see someone younger, step up to the mark and take over. Bob and I are getting a bit old now.
That might be a little tough, but to orchestrate that around the world. But you never know. Maybe it's easier thanks to the internet. You guys did this without the internet and without emails and being able to get somebody right away or without texting. You had to wait for the phone calls, get it all done, and maybe get the bands back together. You weren't sure what's going on with that.
Absolutely. We had to use an ancient thing called telex. Long before cell phones and long before internet.
The telex machine, huh?
Telex machine, yeah, which was like an ancient, fax machine or something. It was very long-winded, but when you look back at it, it's absolutely amazing that we pulled it off.
Well, if you had Bob Geldof working with you, the telex machine would be kept so clean. All right, this is getting bad. My jokes are really bad. Midge Ure, thank you again for coming on Revenge of the 80s Radio with us.
It's been an absolute joy. Thanks, Chris.
And where can people stay updated with you on the internet?
I'm still at it's very simple, midgeure.com. You can get everything that I do is on there. It's all quite simple.
Perfect. Let's play another track from Orchestrated, this time Vienna.